Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Lamates. Today's Daf Yomi is the Eve of Pesach, and today's Daf Yomi, actually at the very end, not sure we're going to get up to it, it does talk about matzah, but it does have a very powerful idea related to the concept of Pesach. So it's a beautiful idea that this Daf Yomi comes on the Eve of Pesach. So we're going to start on the bottom of Ramah Chesam Beis, the last line from the bottom. And the Gemara is going to return to an earlier question, which the Gemara has been discussing the Mishnah, that why is the Mishnah record two cases in where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel give their opinion, but in the first case, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are not arguing, whereas in the second case, they're arguing. In the first case, Beis Shammai says that in the circumstance where a woman inherits property while she's a shomeres yavam, while she's waiting for Yibum, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both say that she's able to use the assets however she wants. However, in the second case, where the Beis Shammai says that under those circumstances where she has the property is split between the estate of the woman's father, meaning to say from her side, and the estate of her husband, i.e., in a situation where she dies, the property is split between them. Whereas Beis Hillel says, no, the money goes to the people who had the money in their status at that point, the chazak, whoever was holding it. So the Gemara is recorded up until now the answer to this problem by Ula and the answer to this problem by Rabbah. Ula's answer was that the first case was referring to a situation where she got the property when she was a shomeres yavam from a rusin, meaning to say she was only betrothed before she fell to yibum. She was not fully married. Whereas the second case is where she was shomeres yavam from nisuin, where she was fully married when she fell to yibum. And then Rabbah gives a different answer. Rabbah says the first case is where she was still alive, and so therefore she was what's considered to be a certain. The money was certainly in her estate, whereas in the latter case she had died, and so therefore it makes a zikas, and so therefore since she had died, there was a matter of inheritance, and so therefore it was a situation where it was she was a suffix, and so therefore both of them had an equal claim to it. They both were uncertain. Abaye comes now and gives a third answer, because Abaye's problem with the second answer. So Abaye comes along and gives the third answer. Abaye's answer is Reisha de Nafua Kashi Shomeres Yavam, Seifa de Nafua Kashi Tachtav de Baal. So Abaye says the first answer is, and this is very complicated. The first part of today's daf is a little challenging, but then it gets easier as the daf goes on. Abaye says the first clause refers to a situation where she inherited this property when she was a shomeres yava, meaning to say she wasn't married to anyone at that point. She was waiting to have the yibum done with her. She had a zika, and so therefore, since she was a shomeres yava and she wasn't married to anybody, so she had a greater claim to it because she wasn't married to anybody at that point. But the second, and so therefore, she was able. Even Beis Shammai would admit that it's her property completely. Whereas the latter clause, ironically, she had inherited it earlier. She got the property earlier, but at that point, her position is actually less because she was married at that point. And so therefore, since she was married at that point, now that her husband has died, the second brother stands in his place, and it's as though he has a greater claim to it, according to Beis Shammai. So say for the nafla kashi tachtav, and therefore they split it. So the Gemara says, because Savar, Abaye must be at the position that yado ki yada. So from the fact that the dispute is when it fell to her when she was married to him, and so therefore Abaye is saying that according to Beis Hillel, she still gets to retain the status. Why? Because Abaye is saying yado ki yada, that they share with it equally when, according to Beis Hillel, when they're married, the woman's assets, what's called the nichse mulug, this property that she has the principal and he has the dividends, when they're fully married, they share with it equally. And so therefore, now that her husband died, according to Beis Hillel, she has the greater claim to it. And so therefore, he doesn't have the right to take them. They don't split it because his status has been diminished. And so therefore, that's what Abaye says. yado ki yada. So comes along the Gemara. The Gemara says, Amrei Rava. Rava says, he argues with Abai's approach. He says, Ida nafula kashehi tachtav, the Baal. So Rava says, no, if she had gotten these assets when she is under the estate of the husband, Ida nafula kashehi tachtav the Baal, if she had gotten really these assets when she was under the estate of the husband, kuyamalo puigi tiyadu adifa. Everybody would say, really, he has a greater claim to it than her, and so now that he has died, they would really split the assets. But rather, what's the state here? What's the law here? But everybody's talking about a situation here where she got the assets while she was shomeres yavam. So if that's the case, she got it after her husband died, so she has a greater claim to it. So Reisha. So what's the reason? The Reisha. So therefore, in the ratio where she gets to do everything, it's as though it's hers. The law of a b'maimer, because what we're talking about here, says Rava, is that the yavam has not betrothed her yet. He has not done the mamer part of the yibum, and so therefore the relationship is more tenuous. But the concluding clause is the concluding case where they split it according to Beis Shammai is the ava b'maimer. Beis Shammai says they split it because the new husband, the yavam, he hasn't fully married her, but he's done mimer, and so therefore it's a higher level of a relationship, and so therefore they split these they split these assets. Because Sava Rava, so Rava's of the position. Remember, we learned about this earlier. The mimer of Beis Shammai osev vaday arusav this suffix nesua. We learned earlier that Beis Shammai says that mimer, if you do this circumstance, it makes you like you're fully betrothed, and so therefore mimer, according to Beis Shammai, makes you like you're a certain arusa, like you're certainly betrothed, and that we already learned. But now we're learning that also makes it a suffix nesua. You're uncertain about whether or not it's a full marriage, and so therefore, since it's a suffix nesua, that therefore they're going to be splitting the assets of the woman here because both sides have a claim to it. And as the Gemara explains, Vaday Arusa, what do you mean it makes her like a Vaday Arusa, like she's certainly betrothed? We've seen this earlier back on Daf Yomi, Lidchos Bitsara, if the Yavam does Erusin, does Maimar with the woman who dies, then it makes it like they're married, and she'll pushes off her co-wife from falling to Yibam. That's what we said the Maimar does. Vaday Arusa Lidchos Bitsara. The suffix nesua, and it makes her like a suffix nesua for our case here, lachok ben chasim, that they divide up the assets. So that's the chiddush of Rava. That's what Rava is introducing here. So Itmar, Mishmei de Rabbi Lazar, Kavase de Rava. So Rabbi Lazar taught like Rava that if the man does maimer according to Beis Shammai, it makes her like a suffix nesua, and they split the assets. The nechse maluk. Gemara says, Veidmar Mishmei de Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, Kavase de Abaye. Whereas Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina taught like Abaye and not like Rava. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar, does Rabbi Lazar really say this idea that according to Beis Shammai it makes her a suffix nesua if he does maimer? V'amar Rabbi Lazar, maimer Beis Shammai, eno kone al lidchos b'tzara bolvad. But we have explicit principle here. Rabbi Lazar said the only thing that maimer does according to Beis Shammai is it makes her like an arusa to push off the co-wife, but it has nothing to do with the assets of nesuin. Gemara says, Epoch, say that Rabbi Lazar didn't say that, reverse that position, meaning to say Rabbi Lazar says like Abaye, Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina says like Rava. The Abaye is saying, or alternatively, don't reverse it. And Amro Rabbi Lazar says, Ki Amri Ana de lo sagila beget. When I said that Maimer is not effective, it only works for Erusin, I wasn't coming to exclude the concept of them dividing up the assets for Nesuin, but I was just trying to say that Maimer, it's still not enough that you're going to say that she requires a get. I was just referring to the case that she requires chalitza from him still, even though they have maimer. But I wouldn't say that it's enough to divide up the nechasim. That the lo kani, meaning to say, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say like this idea. I meant to say, of course, he gets to divide up the assets. I just said, all I said was that she still requires chalitza, but I wasn't saying anything about the dividing up of the assets. And yes, indeed, he still gets to divide up the assets. So Amar Rav Papa Diyuku de Masnis and Kavasa de Abaye. This says we can infer from our Mishnah like Abaye. And how are we referring Diyuku de Masnis like Abaye? How so? Before we get into it, we had said yesterday that there was a problem with Abaye's approach because Abaye has to explain why are we forced? Why would the Mishnah, if we wanted to decide what her assets are like, why would we say it refers to a case where she's dead? It could have referred to a case where she was alive, and we're arguing over the nichse malug, over that assets. So leaving that question aside, other than that question, the Mishnah seems to be more like Abaye. Why? The Katani Nechasim HaNachnasim the Yotz and Ima, because the rest of the Mishnah says we're talking about, the last clause of the Mishnah says we're talking about the assets that entered into the marriage with her and left the marriage with her. What does this mean? My Nachnasim and my Yotzim. What does it mean that we entered into the marriage with her and we left the marriage with her? It must mean Lav Nachnasim or Rishus Abal, the Yotzim Rishus Abal. It must mean those assets that. It must mean those assets that. So. It must mean Nechnasin Rishus Habal, Yotzim Rishus Habal. It entered into her. It entered. She got those assets while she was still married to the husband, and they went out from the Rishus Habal to the Rishus Av, to her father's estate. And so that's exactly the scenario that Abaye was referring to. Alpha got the kasha mesa, and even though we're talking about, we have that difficulty about why would the Mishnah have to be talking about this scenario? That was the question of Ula Peros that we had raised that question on Lamed Chesam base. Nevertheless, Sulo Midi, that this is the proper way to read it. Okay, this was a challenging Gemara. Really, its proper place for it is in Subos because this is a direct statement of a direct quotation of the Mishnah from Ksubos, but the Gemara inserted this Ksubos discussion into Yevamos. And now we go to the end of that Mishnah. It says that once the second person does the brother does Yibum with his brother's widow, that she is like his wife for every matter. Kansa harei k'ishel kol davar. What does it mean she's like his wife for every matter? With what respect? So I'm Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Lomar Shemagar Shebeget Umachzira Umachzira. It means to say that he's allowed to divorce her with a get, that when he divorces her, he would divorce her with the bill of divorce, Umachzira, and in the end can he remarry her. Mar says, Magar Shebeget. What do you mean he divorces her with a get? Pshita, this is obvious. Of course he divorces her with a get. He's married to her. That's how we divorce. In Jewish law, we divorce with a get. Mar says, no, Salkadai Techamina, you might have thought, whole the ksiv, since it says about her, it says in the verse, that you take her for your wife, and v'yima, which means you do yibum, meaning to say, Amrachmana, since it uses the word yivma, you might have said, well, she still has the first yibum words upon her, and so therefore, b'chalitza im beget lo. You might have thought you use chalitza and not a get. Kamash Milan, that you use a get. You use a get and not chalitza if you do yibum with her. So the Gemara says, well, wait 1 second. Says the Gemara, machzira, that you're even after you divorce her, you're allowed to remarry her. Pshita, well, that's obvious. When you divorce a woman, you're allowed to remarry her. The Gemara says, no. Sakadaita chamina. You might have thought to say mitzvah de Ramya Rachmana Alea of the Hashem take away be'isur eishes ach. You might have said, well, he did the mitzvah of marrying his brother's widow, but now that he's already married her, he did the mitzvah. Now that he's divorced her, maybe he can't marry her again because now she falls under the category of the prohibition of his brother's wife. Kamash Mulan, we say that that's not the case. He's allowed to remarry her. Gemara says, maybe that mitzvah should apply. It says Gemara, that you take her for his wife. Once he married her, she's like his wife for every respect. There's the Gemara, but the ksuva goes back to the first husband. My time, and what's the reason why the ksuba is paid? The ksuba is the bond, the marriage bond that is mortgaged to the wife. What's the reason why that comes from the estate of the first husband? Because Isha Hiknu Woman Hashem. This was a woman who was given to the second man, so to speak, from heaven. He never agreed to it. He never entered into this arrangement. It was done from heaven. And so therefore the money for the estate is only mortgaged. The money for the bridal ksuba only comes from the first husband estate and not the second, not the brothers. So the Gemara says, but if the first brother does not have money to pay, the estate, takinu amisheni. Well, then the second brother has to pay from his estate because we want to make sure that it's not easy to divorce her. It has to be that the whole concept of ksuba makes it difficult to divorce her. So the Gemara says mitzvah begadol yabim, that the mitzvah to do yibam, or up to the Mishnah, the mitzvah of yibam ideally should be done by the oldest brother. So let's say the oldest brother doesn't want to do the yibam. And you go to all the other brothers. So if they don't want to do it, you go back to the oldest brother, mitzvah, that it's your mitzvah, that you have to do the mitzvah, either do the chalitza or the yibam. And let's say the oldest brother says, I don't want to do it because I'm waiting for, I have a younger brother and he's a minor. I want to wait for him, I want to wait for him to get older to do it, to become over bar mitzvah. Or you say, I have an older brother, I have another older brother. Well, let's say the oldest brother who's around says, I want to wait till the oldest brother comes from overseas. So he says, I want to wait till the oldest brother comes from overseas. Or let's say the person is a cheresh or a shota. Let's say he says, I want to wait for the oldest brother to become healthy. He's sick. He can't do it. Now, ain't shoman. We don't listen to him. We say to him, Alecha mitzvah. We say upon him, no. Rather we say to him, the mitzvah is on you. Either do chalitz or yibam. So the Gemara says. So now we're up to the Gemara. Gemara says, Idmar, we learned bias katan v'chalitza gadol. Let's say we have a choice. Who could do the yibam? A younger brother could do the yibam, or he's not a minor, he's a younger brother, or the chalitza could be done by the oldest brother. Which one takes precedence? Meaning, say yibam is preferable to chalitza, but the older brother is preferable to the younger brother. So you have a choice between the chalitza of the younger brother, the chalitza of the older brother, or the yibam of the younger brother. Which should we do? So here there's a dispute between Rabbi Shimon Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. One says the yibum of the younger brother takes precedence, and one said the chalitza of the older brother takes precedence. And the one who says the yibum of the younger brother takes precedence, the mitzvah be yibum, because the mitzvah is to do yibum. For the one who says the chalitza of the older brother takes precedence, the malkam gadol bias katan lav kumi. When the older brother is there, he's the man. So the yibum of the younger brother is nothing when the older brother is there. Gemara says Tanan l'ratza machzirin al kol ha'achin. If he doesn't want to do it, we go to all the. So let's bring him proof for this. So he says l'ratza. If he doesn't want to do it, machzirin al kol ha'achin. We go to all the brothers, and we ask them to do the yibum. Ma'alav doesn't mean it's that he only wants to do, the older brother only wants to do chalitz. And then we say go to all the younger brothers to do yibum. Don't we learn from here? But don't we learn from here that the yibum of the younger brother is better than the chalitza? The yibum of the younger brother is better than the chalitza of the older brother? The says no. What it means is no, the older brother doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to do yibum or chalitza. Then we go to the younger brothers to do yibum. Not a proof. Gemara says, but wait, the Kavase, what about the next case? Gabe Achin, or where it states by the other brothers, that if they don't want to do it, if it says that if it says the younger brothers don't want to do it, meaning say if it means that they don't want to do yibum or chalitza, that why do you go back to the older brother? Why don't you just force them to do the chalitza? So this is a proof that it means if they don't want to do yibum, you go back to the older brother to do chalitza. No, Gemara says no. Even the mitzvah no, because since the mitzvah ideally is on the oldest brother, therefore he's the one we force. Tanan, we learned. Again, we're trying to prove it. Let's say he says, no, I'm not doing yibum because I'm waiting for my minor brother to grow older, to become bar mitzvah. Ain't shoman lo. We don't listen to him. And if the yibum of the minor is better than the chalitz of the older brother, why don't we listen to him? Ain't shoman lo. Nintar, we should wait for him to become bar mitzvah. Maybe he'll do yibum. Gemara says, according to your logic, Ubegado, let's say he says my oldest brother is overseas and I want to wait for him at Yava Medina Sayam. I want to wait for him to come from overseas. In Shomanlo, we don't listen to him. Why don't we listen to him? Nintar Doma Asi. Umiyabe, maybe he's going to come and do the Yibam or the Chalitza, depending on the version of the Gemara. Why don't I wait for him? But from the fact we don't wait for him, we see Kol Shehuye Mitzvah Loma Shahina. We never wait to do a mitzvah. This is a concept which we're learning on Erev Pesach. It's also like matzah. Matzah is the concept of we push to do the mitzvah as soon as possible. Same thing here too. Kol Shehuye Mitzvah Loma Shahina. We do the mitzvah as soon as possible, and so therefore we don't have a significant proof here about which is better, the chalitza of the younger brother, the yibum of the younger brother, chalitza of an older brother. Ista Amri, on top of Amatesim base, there are some who learn the Gemara as follows. Ista Amri, some learn it like this. The Bia Koyamalo Pligi, the Bias Katan Adifa. Everybody says when it comes to yibum, everybody says that the yibum of a younger brother is better than the yibum of an older brother, than the chalitza of an older brother. Ki pligi, where's the argument? The chalitza's katan. They only argue about the chalitza of a younger brother versus the chalitza of an older brother. This is the argument. Chalitza's katan, the chalitza's gadol. If you have the chalitza of a younger brother versus the chalitza of an older brother. Pligi ba Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. That's where Rabbi Yochanan and Shimon Levi argue. Chad amar chalitza's gadol atifa. One is of the position that the chalitza of the older brother is better. The other positions they're exactly the same. The one who says the chalitza of the older brother is better, the mitzvah begadol, because the mitzvah is by an older brother. The idach, and the other one says mitzvah begadol. When we say the mitzvah is by the older brother, only with respect to yibam. But with respect to chalitza, we say kadadinenu. They're exactly the same. With respect to chalitza, we say that they're exactly the same. So the Gemara wants to try and bring a proof for this. Is the chalitza of the younger brother the same as the chalitza of the older brother? Tanan, well, let's go back to our Mishnah. If they don't want to do the yibum, they only want to do chalitza, we still go back to the older brother and we ask him to do the chalitza. It's the younger brother's only want to do chalitza, and we go back to the older brother. Don't we see from here that the chalitza of the older brother is better? The Gemara says no. No, it means they don't want to do chalitza or yibum. The Kavah say in a similar case, the Gemara says, well, if that's the way you want to do it, that the younger brothers don't want to do chalitza, we go back to the older brother to do the chalitza. The Gemara says, well, the Kavah say well, if that's the case, by the oldest brother, he doesn't want to chalitza and yibum. Why do we go back to the older one to force him? Why don't we force the younger brother to do it? So Gemara explained, no, given the mitzvah day, since because since the main mitzvah is on the older brother, we force the older brother to do the chalitza. Again, the Gemara is trying to derive this proof. If he says, I want to wait for my older brother to come from overseas to do the yibum, we don't listen to him. Or maybe to do the chalitza. And if he says, I'm waiting for him to come from overseas to do the chalitza, why don't we listen to him? Don't we prove from here that the chalitza of the older brother is not better than the chalitza of the younger brother? Why don't we wait for him to come and do the chalitza? The Gemara says, well, what about your argument? Here's where it falls short, because he say, I want to wait for my minor brother to become bar mitzvah so he could do the yibum. Why don't we listen to him? Why don't we wait for him to come and do the yibum? Which is obviously for sure better than chalitza, or maybe we're discussing it. And the Gemara says, we don't wait to do a mitzvah, even though if the other guy's not there, we push the mitzvah. We don't lose the opportunity. This is a question we have a lot of times. Which is better, if you could do a certain mitzvah now, or if you wait, you'll be able to do the mitzvah even better. So that's a good question. Like if you could do it now, like we have this, like we could have a second sunrise, or if you wait, you have a minyan. But you're not sure. Maybe the minyan's not going to be as good. Like you have a question, like this is a classic tshuva. Like a person says, I could get out of prison. The man was in prison. Get out of prison to daven one day of the year. Which day should I get out? Should I wait for Yom Kippur? And that could be the one day I daven. No, you do it right away. So that's one of the approaches. Do it right away. Do it the next day, because maybe you don't wait. Take the opportunity to do the mitzvah. Tanan also mitzvah yibum kodemes la mitzvah chalitza. The mitzvah of yibum comes before the mitzvah of chalitza. Meaning to say, if you have an opportunity to do one or the other, you do the mitzvah of yibum. So Barishona Shayu Miskadnu L'Shem Mitzvah. That was the case when at first everybody had when they did the mitzvah of Yibum, their kavana was so pure, and they were only doing it because it was a commandment specifically from God. But now, who knows what their intent is? Amru, now they said mitzvah chalitza kodemas mitzvah Yibum. Now the mitzvah chalitza comes before Yibum. Amar Rav ein kofin. Rav says, but nevertheless ein kofin. What does that mean? Ein kofin. So there's different approaches here, but we'll take Rashi's approach. Rashi is a very radical, revolutionary approach here. Rashi says, if both of them want to do Yibum, we don't force them to do Chalitza. But if she doesn't want to do Yibum, or obviously if he doesn't want to do Yibum, but if she doesn't want to do Yibum, he can't force her to do Chalitza. And Rashi says, even though this is not Rashi brings Marshall's evidence for this from other sugyas in our Gemara and says she has the right to just say, I don't want to do Yibum with you, even though most of the Gemaras seem to indicate that a man can force the woman to do Yibum. Rashi says she can say, I don't want to do Yibum with you, and she has the right to only do Chalitza nowadays. And it's a very powerful Rashi for a woman. Rashi seems to be arguing basically the mitzvah of Yibum, she has total right of rejection, which is not the pashtus of the Torah or the Gemara. But Rashi says that's what we do today. When they came in front of Rav, he said to them, he said to the man, you have the right. Do you want to do chalitza or do you want to do yibum? And he says, but the Torah says it totally depends upon you, because it says if the man doesn't want to do it, which implies that if he wants to do the yibum, he has a choice. He buy chalitz, he buy yibum. He can do either one. Rav Yehuda Savar and Kofin. Rav Yehuda also says we don't force him. We don't force him anymore. Iskin Rav Yehuda Begita, and this is what Rav Yehuda established in the get the chalitza. When he would do chalitza, he would write the following contract. He would say, ponis pas ponis, that such and such a woman, ikravas yas ploni Yevamos, she came before the such and such a person who was her yavam, kadmano beidina, and they came in front of the court, vishtamudina, and it became clear to us, to the court, that he was the paternal brother of her husband. The Amriwe, and they said to him, Itzavas liyavam yavam. Do you want to do yibam? Meaning they gave him the option. Below, if you don't want to do yibam, itla ala raglech. Stick out your foot before her. The amina, your right foot. The itla ala ragla. The amina, and he would stick out, or the itla lay. It should really be the itla lay, and he stuck out his right foot. Visharas sina me'al raglahi, and she removed the shoes from his foot. The arakta bampayu, she spat in front of him. Roko de mischazil beidina. It has to be a spit that the whole court could see al ara on the ground. So you see, he gave him the choice. And he says, and he concluded and said, then we read to him Madakasa b'Sefer Araisa to Moshe. And then we read to him exactly what it says in the Torah of Moshe. So that, by the way, that's a ceremony that I've seen only once in my life. I saw this chalitza ceremony only once in my life. So Ishtamudinu, and so it says that we know him. How does the court know that he's the paternal brother? One says that you need witnesses. One says even a relative. Isha, even a relative or even a woman who's not always accepted as a witness was able to testify about this. It's not really testimony; it's just revealing facts. And so therefore, isha, even a relative and even a woman is able to testify. So now we say Barishona, at first, at first, when the two parties had the pure intent of the mitzvah, mitzvah yibum kodemas mitzvah chalitza. The mitzvah of yibum came prior to the mitzvah of chalitza. But nowadays, nowadays, if they don't intend for the purpose of mitzvah, mitzvah chalitza kodemas mitzvah yibum. We say the mitzvah of chalitza comes prior to mitzvah of yibum. So Amar Rami Bar Chama Rabbi Yitzchak Chazru Amar, that they actually reversed themselves and they said mitzvah yibum kodemas mitzvah chalitza. They say nowadays the mitzvah of yibum comes prior to chalitza. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Echshrei Darim. You think the generations are getting better nowadays? If anything, our generations are getting worse. So he says Meikara Sabri like Abba Shol. At first they held like Abba Shol that the mitzvah of who said that we don't do Yibam anymore. And then we follow the Rabbanon who say we do Yibam today. The Tanya Abashol said, "Akones is Yavimto l'shem Noel l'shem Ushus l'shem Davar Acher." Let's say somebody marries his brother's widow, but the purpose is not because it was a mitzvah from the Torah, but it's because he thought she was beautiful, or because he likes her, or for other reason. It's like he is having an incestuous relationship. The Karavani be'ina lios of one mamzer. He says the offspring is a mamzer, not allowed. Whereas Chum say no, we disagree. Yevamo yavala. It says in the verse, Yevamo yavala. It means mikol makom. He has to do the mitzvah of yibam regardless. The Gemara says, Man tana lahadetana rabbanon. Who is the one who said this position? Yevamo yavala mitzvah. Who is the one who said it's a mitzvah? Shebetchila haisalav b'kol heter. We'll stop here. We'll pick this up. God willing, we're going to do this stuff at noon. I'll record it at noon, and on Pesach, everybody should do the daf, but I'll record it today at noon, and then